October 17th meeting of the HB 609 Subcommittee. I'm Representative Michael Vose, Chair of this subcommittee. And we have with us today Representative Corman, Representative McGee, and Representative Harrington. Representative Kaplan will not be able to attend. So before we get started with our actual business, I'd ask you all to stand and join me in reciting the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Once again, thank you for being here today. This is the second meeting of the HB 609 Subcommittee. Our first meeting was on October the 3rd. And at that meeting, we decided we reviewed some draft legislation that we would consider for an amendment for HB 609. And we went over that draft legislation and came up with some changes that we thought needed to be made. One of those changes was to the role of the Site Evaluation Committee Administrator. The other was to define what substantial change means. And the third definite that we wanted to add to this potential amendment was some language to describe how a special track or a fast track for energy projects that are going to be built on an existing site, how that would work. And then the other possibility that we considered was to move forward with a change in the makeup of the Site Evaluation Committee, reducing the current number of members from 9 to a future number of 5. And that number of 5 would be described as the 3 members of the PUC, the Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Services, and a public member. And at the time, we discussed the possibility that that public member would be an attorney with expertise in land use planning. And after discussing that idea with Tom Getz, who has been a consultant for us on this project, and some other folks, it became obvious that restricting it to an attorney with land use planning expertise would narrow the field to such a degree that we might have trouble filling that role. So we've had a redraft of the proposed amendment, and there are copies up here, a few extra copies, if anybody out there would like to have a look at what we're going to be working from here today. And what we decided to go with was the existing statutory description of public members. Such public members, and I'm going to read from the statute, that's RSA 162H:4-B, number 1. Such public members shall be residents of the state of New Hampshire with expertise or experience in one or more of the following areas: public deliberative or adjudicative proceedings, business management, environmental protection, natural resource protection, energy facility design, construction, operation, or management, community and regional planning or economic development, municipal or county government, or the governing of unincorporated places. That, I believe, will provide an adequate number of potential candidates so that we can find a public member and an alternate public member that would be well qualified to participate in the SEC process. So that's the first change that the proposed legislation the draft legislation that each member of the subcommittee has before you here. That's the first change that that this draft reflects. Now, Representative Corman had a suggestion to add some language to one public member, specifying that it be chosen by the governor and council, but that language is also part of H4-B, where it says the governor, with the consent of the council, shall appoint one public member and an alternate public member. So that language is there. I think we potentially could add language that says one public member as specified in RSA 162H-4:B, or whatever the exact H:4-B, the exact reference there. There is one other change in that section, and that is that 3 members of the committee shall constitute a quorum for the purpose of conducting the committee's business, except that the 3 Public Utilities Commissioners alone shall not constitute a quorum. I think that was language that we agreed was important to add to our at our last meeting. The next section that I think needs review is section 5, which says that the senior serving attorney member of the Public Utilities Commission shall serve as the chairperson and chief executive of the committee, and may, and then it goes on to describe exactly what the chairperson can and cannot do or should be responsible for. And I understand from talking to several people about this that this could be controversial. So I've asked the Public Utilities Commission to come here this morning to talk to us about this. And we have a representative of the PUC, Mr. Alex Spidell, or is it Seidel? Spidell. Could you come up to the microphone here and let us know what the commission thinks of the idea of making the senior attorney on the commission be the chairperson of the SEC?
Good morning, members of the subcommittee. Representative Vose. Good to see you again, Representative Harrington. Representative Harrington and I worked together at the commission years ago, and I would like to offer in the first instance that the commission would abide by any determinations made by the general court as part of this bill or any enactment of this bill, but I can offer some historical perspective and experience on how administratively things work at the commission in conjunction with the site evaluation committee. So around 2015, it was the year 2015, I was appointed by Chairman Martin Honigberg of the Public Utilities Commission to serve as his designee on a subcommittee relating to the C3 upgrade in the town of Newington. And that process proceeded for about 90 days. It was a very successful process insofar as the parties, including citizen interveners and various municipalities on the seacoast and their fire departments, and the applicant were able to negotiate, and advocates were able to negotiate a settlement resolving all issues and essentially recommending that the subcommittee approve an exemption request from full site evaluation committee review. And as the presiding officer, together with my colleagues on the subcommittee, we approved that request through the settled process. Throughout this process, I reported to Chairman Martin Honigberg, who was the chairman of the Public Utilities Commission and also chairman of the Site Evaluation Committee. And in the view of the commission, it would be optimal to maintain a clear designation of authority, of lines of authority and lines of personnel, I would say responsibility and reporting to the chairperson of the Public Utilities Commission, whether they are an attorney or not. Because in any agency, it's important to maintain clear lines of responsibility and reporting. And the chairperson of the Public Utilities Commission is really the ideal hub of the PUC. And so we have had non-attorney chairpersons. We have one right now who's an engineer. And I think the phrase that fits would be to privilege experience in an attorney over experience in an engineer or a scientist or an economic person would be a mistake, because I think any chairperson that has been put in that position of authority by the governor and the executive council is usually a stellar professional who's capable of managing the SEC process and the PUC process. So I would just recommend and advise that we stick with the concept of the governing authority within the PUC and the PUC's operations within the site evaluation committee to be maintained within the person of the chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you. So did I understand you to say that if the PUC chair and the SEC chair were different people, that it would create problems with regard to reporting and other administrative activity within the two groups?
I would say that if the general court wanted to make the chairman of the Public Utilities Commission the primary responsible person from the Public Utilities Commission at the SEC, and then have a separate attorney designee out there being the chairperson, that could cause some problems, because you may have designees and folks on the subcommittees that are being selected by the chairman of the Public Utilities Commission to work on subcommittee work and to do other such activities, not necessarily having clear lines of direction insofar as you may have two personnel at the PUC, assuming that they are two commissioners, providing concurrent advice regarding what the personnel should be up to. And so I did report to Chairman Honigberg when I was at the PUC as a site evaluation committee designee. I would check in with him to make sure that our overall operational direction was satisfactory. He did not interfere in day-to-day operations or decision-making, but I would double-check to make sure that our general thrust of direction was in the right direction. So I just offer that. Thank you.
Okay, Representative McGee has a question, but before we get to that, I just want one more clarification. The draft from which we are working, which reduces the number of SEC members from 9 to 5, in addition to making this suggested change that we're discussing right now, it also eliminates subcommittees. It repeals the part of statute that creates or allows for the use of subcommittees, so that all SEC business would become full SEC business. There would be no more subcommittees. So the clarification I need here is that if there were no subcommittees, would there still be some kind of a reporting conflict potentially between the PUC chair and a different person acting as the SEC chair, namely the attorney serving on the PUC?
One question I would have in terms of how you all imagine this would operate is, would there be any need for supporting PUC personnel to offer analytical services to the site evaluation committee? Is there an expectation that the site evaluation committee in its new form would leverage and utilize the analytical resources of the senior advisors and attorneys at the PUC?
I think the answer to that is yes.
So in that instance, sir, I would reiterate that it would be best to have those people reporting to and responding to the directives of the chairman of the Public Utilities Commission.
Okay, Representative McGee has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for taking my question. So when you explained that you were a designee that was allowed to run a committee or an SEC docket or process, you said that you reported directly back to the chairman of the PUC, Mr. Honigsberg. Is that correct?
Yes, Martin Honigberg. He's
Yeah.
now correct at the current time a justice of the Superior
Yeah,
Court.
I remember him when he was at the SEC. So I guess what I'm confused about is if the amendment to this bill moves forward, naming the attorney currently serving on the PUC as the person who would head up the adjudicative proceedings for the SEC, wouldn't that person still have the same communication vehicle with the chair that you had when you ran the process that you said was so successful?
Well, I don't want to necessarily assume Madam Representative, that I would know all the permutations of how this would play out in real time, but I would offer this, that there could be a circumstance where the most senior attorney on the commission is not necessarily the chairperson. So, that kind of creates an inherent tension, because especially in the current format of the commission, you really do directly respond and are on a personnel level responsible to the chairperson of the commission. So it's that classic example of what happens when you have two captains of the ship. Where do you go as a subordinate employee? I'm just speaking from myself, kind of my own sense of how this would play out, because I'm always very responsive to what my supervising people are interested in my advice for, but also to whatever they would like me to do and where they would like to guide me. I don't want to necessarily find myself as a senior advisor in a position of having to deal with contradictory guidance. So I would say that, again, I would reiterate that to have that setup could create problems on a personnel basis at the Public Utilities Commission, because you would have a junior commissioner who is not a chairperson operating in this framework. You have subordinate employees, of which there are not very many in the commission, having to engage in site evaluation committee business and potentially receiving contradictory direction from two different people. It's just the nature of things. And I would further add that the commission by design is a bipartisan structure. So there's often, you have essentially a multiple potential for confusion or lack of clarity on how things are approached.
May I follow up? Thank you. Okay, so I understand what you're saying. Now, Martin Honigsberg was an attorney, and I think one of the objectives that we had in requesting that the attorney representative on the PUC be the person who heads up the SEC is because we thought there was a value in having someone with direct adjudicative experience in that role. My understanding of the appointment of the current chair of the PUC is that his background, he had no background in energy and no background that would be relevant to the role that he's currently presiding in as chair, certainly for site evaluation. And so I'm not trying to diminish his contribution and his ability and his business background and all that. But I think the concern is that we not give all of the responsibility to just the person who currently resides in that chairship. There's no reason why someone junior or otherwise who serves as a PUC commissioner couldn't take on those responsibilities, especially if they have, again, the adjudicative background and also background in New Hampshire's energy that the other two commissioners possess. So it's my perspective that we've had some issues with legislative directives and the way they've been carried out under the interpretations of a person who doesn't really have a lot of experience in energy. And I have to bring that up in the hearing here because we've already had to rework or undo or go back and try and address issues that have come up before the PUC in its current formation because it was not interpreted in the way that it was intended. So
do you have a question for?
yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying identifying having adjudicative experience directly as being the chair for the SEC, which is a separate process. It's not part of the PUC. It's just that the PUC has always been part of, has always participated in that board, in that committee. I guess what I'm asking is what relevant experience you think the current chair brings to the SEC process that would make it important for him to be in charge of both?
I don't think you need to answer that question. I think that question is kind of irrelevant to the subject we're discussing here. We're trying to come up with a process that will work. going forward. And so we don't need to discuss the personalities or the qualifications of the current employees of the commission or the SEC. What
do
we're trying to
understand
do here is create a process that will allow whoever is serving and whoever is appointed, remembering that these appointments are typically made by the governor
Right.
and council.
And I
So,
think, I guess my point is to go back to the point that is being presented to us is that administratively, it would be messy if the head of the SEC is not the same as the head of the PUC. And my question is really, give us some details of that, because I just think you gave us an example where you headed up an SEC proceeding and reported back to the chair of the PUC and didn't run into any problems. So I just don't see how the configuration that we've provided here would not work.
yes, if you have any details that
Yes.
or examples of how such an arrangement could be difficult, we'd love to hear those.
So I would just like to reiterate that, especially in the current structure, because in the old PUC that was combined with the Department of Energy, it was a bigger agency. Essentially had all the personnel under the rubric of the Public Utilities Commission, and you had intermediary management personnel with titles such as executive director and general counsel and so forth. But here it's a very small, flat agency. So I report directly to the chairman, Mr. Dan Goldner. So it's a very direct connection. And I think the key answer that was provided by Representative Vose was, well, we're going to expect the senior advisors at the Public Utilities Commission, we have a lot of expertise in this area, a lot of experience. We're going to be expected to help out the state through the site evaluation committee, through the analytical process and the legal analysis process and the legwork process of preparing the orders and so forth. So if you're putting those employees in a position where you're reporting to a junior commissioner instead of your chairperson, and I'm talking about the future. I think Representative Vose is exactly on target with that. I'm talking about 20 years in the future, and it's not necessarily about me personally. It's about the future subordinate employees of the commission as it's currently constituted. They could be put in an uncomfortable or confusing situation. And regarding the qualifications of the current chairman or someone like that in the future, he is a business executive of 35 years experience in the semiconductor industry and the defense industry. He is a very highly educated electrical engineer. He has a lot of insight on how international business works and how business at large works. So there are skill sets beyond the attorney skill set that can offer a lot to the site evaluation committee. In future, for instance, we could have a research scientist, a physicist, or someone like that who would serve as chairperson of the SEC. And they wouldn't necessarily be the attorney, but as a captain of the ship, as a leader of the agency, they could provide a lot of assistance to the SEC effort and reassure their subordinate employees that when they're helping out on that, they're getting clear direction on what to do. So I would encourage consideration of that point. Representative Vose, do you think I've answered all your questions?
I think you have. Thank you. Now, there may be other questions from other members here. So
Thank you, sir.
Representative
Yeah.
Harrington, for example, has a question.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. It's nice to see you again, too.
Same here, thank
It's been
you.
a long time. I think what I'm trying to see here is that you're talking about when you go down the middle of the page, your 5 there, it says, senior serving attorney member of the Public Utilities Commission shall serve as chairperson and as chief executive of the committee. But then the committee is attached to the Department of Energy administratively. Is that where the confusion part is coming from? And also, as a follow-up to that, maybe it's in here someplace that I'm missing it, but I don't see anybody being named chair of the site evaluation committee. There's just the members are listed, but no one is listed as chair. So if that was defined as, let's just say, for example, the chair of the PUC, would that make this more operable for you in this way? Or is the fact that it's administratively assigned to the Department of Energy causing the confusion? If it is, I missed it. Can you tell me where it is?
You just read it.
The senior serving member of the Public Utilities, the senior serving member of the Public Utilities Commission.
Shall serve as
Oh, okay, I thought that meant, I'm sorry, I read that as a staff attorney, not the fact that one of the commissioners is an attorney. That's what you're referring to? Okay, all right, so.
That's
So-
what we're.
So
That's
is that,
what we're
okay,
discussing.
so forget about that, then the confusion factor is that you have people that, is it attached to the Department of Energy, but you're, the, whatever this, you have people working for the commission at the same time? Is that where the confusion's coming from?
I don't think so, Representative Harrington. I just read the language a few moments ago. It was presented to me just a few moments ago to the room, so to speak. And I will offer this, that same rubric of being attached to, administratively attached to the Department of Energy pertains to the Public Utilities Commission itself under SB 2. So that means the mechanics of, for example, we have personnel over in the Department of Energy that help us out with our business office needs. So, for instance, things such as reimbursement of travel expenses and human resources type things such as health insurance and things like that. So I think that's what that refers to, and perhaps the new personnel, the administrator coming into the PUC mothership, so to speak, also being able to make use of the administrative attachment to the Department of Energy. The Department of Energy also does more mundane things for us, such as, I believe, office supplies, acquisition of some of that material and things of that nature.
Okay, all right. And just one follow-up. I think, I think it'd be easy to make the mistake that I just made, because when you refer to a member of the Public Utilities Commission, that can always be looked at as anybody that works for the commission, not just commissioners. Normally, when we refer to commissioners, we spell it out. So it would have to be something like the commissioner who's the senior serving attorney of the Public Utilities Commission. So it's clear that we're talking about a commissioner here, and not, I read it as the senior attorney that worked for the commission, not being a commissioner. So I think that would help clarify it. Thank you.
That's a good clarification. Thank you. Representative Corman, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for taking my question. And actually, this is probably more of a question for the chair, but you referred to the possibility of designees of the PUC serving on the Site Evaluation Commission. As I think I heard you say that.
Well, that was in the past. That was in 2015 when we had the subcommittee structure, and I believe we still have it in theory now. But it appears that in the latest, this subcommittee question has gone through some to and fro over the last year or so. And it seems that now you're toggling into the no category on the subcommittee question.
Right, right. So I just want to verify, I guess, with the chair, as I read the current draft, it doesn't even admit for designees of the PUC commissioners. It would just be the 3 PUC commissioners.
Yes, correct.
Okay, thank you. I do have a separate, well,
Go
a
ahead.
comment more than a question. I'm just thinking about this issue of, let's say, authority of a subordinate commissioner serving as chair of the SEC when it's not necessary, yes, serving as chair of the SEC and not necessarily the PUC chair, so that you sort of have an inversion there. It's not directly relevant, but I just want to point out, I chaired departments at Dartmouth for 10 years. And we would often have committees within the departments. And we'd have a chair of the committee who wasn't me as department chair, and I would serve on the committee. And I can just say there was never an issue. It was clear what the lines of authority were within that committee of the department, and it was clear what the lines of authority were within the department as a whole. So I think this can be worked out, and I just don't really see a huge problem here.
All right, well, this seems to be an issue that needs further discussion. So I want to thank you, Mr. Speidel, for being here and giving us your perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I'd like to hear maybe from the Department of Energy, Mr. Elms and Mr. Shulock, if you could give us your perspective on this question of whether having the senior serving attorney member of the Public Utilities Commissioner serve as the chairperson and chief executive of the SEC is a conflict, a good idea, a bad idea? What do you think?
Sure. For the record, Chris Elms, Deputy Commissioner of the New Hampshire Department of Energy, and I'm joined by David Shulock, our General Counsel. I'd like to preface my comments by saying that I think Carlton Simpson is a fabulous job in his current role. I think he'd be a fabulous chairman of any committee or commission or whatever you put him in charge of. But I personally, and again, DOE, we're not a part of this. This is just our perspective as fellow state agencies and with some certainly experience in this realm when we were the PUC. We would be opposed to this provision. I think, when we saw the language, we were a little bit, kind of questioning what is the problem that we're here to solve. I'm sure you all have the same experience that I have, which is experience with chairmen of various committees, commissions, whatever, who aren't attorneys, who do an excellent job. And I'm sure we've all dealt with attorneys who, and no, all due respect to the attorneys in the room, including the one to my right, but who can get bogged down in minutia or whatever it might be, and who might not be the most effective in an adjudicative setting. And frankly, I don't think an attorney alone has necessarily adjudicative experience beyond someone else. I think what I've heard here is that part of what we're looking at in terms of making this change is in part due to ideological misalignment with the current chairman of the Public Utilities Commission. I don't know of any problems that the SEC has had in terms of their fulfilling their adjudicative responsibilities. There was an example used that the legislature has had to come in and fix things. The one example I can think of is obviously House Bill 549, which our agency was, involved in the drafting and passage of with the legislature, including folks in the room. I would point out that the decision that was in response to was made under a chairman who was an attorney and no longer works at the commission. So I don't see how that would be a relevant example in this case of solving, a problem with an attorney not doing a great job. The way we see it is that the individual matters, and that, the way it's been set up with the PUC and the SEC has been successful. The venue for issues related to personnel would probably be more appropriate for the governor and council and not legislation. Obviously, the legislature has the prerogative to do what you'd like, but I think you might want to ask yourself whether or not legislating on the basis of an individual who has a term, and there is a process to go through that, and that is the governor and council. David, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
No.
Nothing to add. Representative Harrington has a question.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. Just based on your experience, I'm wondering if this creates a bit of confusion as well. We have what we now know is the commission, the PUC commissioner, who's the senior serving attorney, shall serve as the chief executive officer of the committee. And it lists all the things he does. But then we talk about the administrator, and the administrator shall be hired by and under the supervision of the chairperson of the Public Utilities Commission, who in many cases might not be the senior attorney, and his duties as assigned and extent, blah, 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 blah. So you have administrator who reports to the chair of the PUC, and then you have an SCC who is chaired by someone other than the chair of the PUC. Does that build in confusion in your mind?
Yeah, and I would say that it's, as Attorney Spidell alluded to, nothing is insurmountable. And if the general court wants to go in that direction, I'm sure they will figure it out. But it does introduce a level of structural awkwardness that is just going to make the process less efficient, and it's going to make the process a little more difficult to achieve, and could lead to a situation where folks are not as able to as effectively do their jobs in either the PUC or the SEC. And if, for us, as we see it, is the juice worth the squeeze, right? Is the problem that you're solving going to be balanced out by the difficulties you're introducing? I would say no, but obviously that is the general court's prerogative.
Anything to add, Mr. Shulock?
I think I would add that it is going to be very confusing for employees at the PUC to understand which master they should listen to. And the system that you're setting up depends upon those two masters getting along, communicating well with one another, and agreeing on how the PUC's assets, personnel assets will be utilized, right? And it's wonderful when those three commissioners get along, but I can tell you they don't always. I have witnessed it. It is paralyzing, and you could paralyze two agencies by having disagreement among the two chiefs. So it's really something I would recommend against as a
So to follow up on Representative Harrington's question, if the PUC commissioner is responsible for supervising the employee who is occasionally designated to be the SEC administrator, could he cause problems by not allowing that person to serve an adequate amount of time to serve the position that he's being asked to serve as SEC administrator?
I do think that's what you're setting up. So, part of the thinking of this is you bring the administrator inside so that there is no downtime for that employee, right? That their extra time is covered by work at the PUC and paid for by the assessment, right? So that there's a free flow of money. That's the PUC chairman's prerogative, right? So they're going to be that chairperson is going to be assigning work to be done at the PUC, right? And can just load it up, right? Right.
Thank you,
And
Representative
the
Harrington.
SEC chair could do the same, right? And then you're just, if you assume that they're going to get along and they're going to communicate and, there are enough hours to go around, everything's wonderful. But trust me, they don't always.
Okay, Representative Harrington has a
I would
follow-up.
agree with that last statement, having been there and lived it. I think we're kind of chasing a red herring here. I mean, somehow we're coming with the assumption that the chair of the PUC is not qualified to be chair of the site evaluation committee, yet he's been appointed chair of the PUC, which is going to be meeting on a much more regular basis, having a lot more money involved in it, and they've been appointed by the governor, confirmed by the executive council, as being able to fulfill the duties of the chair of the PUC. So to say that somehow, because he's not a lawyer, if that's the case, he's not allowed to be able to fulfill the duties of the site evaluation committee, I think is a red herring we're chasing. We just should, there's no need for this. Put one person in charge, and if that person happens to be a lawyer, great. If he's not, he's got great legal staff that he can contact. I just think this is a problem that doesn't exist that we're trying to solve.
Okay, do either of you have a question for these gentlemen? All right, thank you. We appreciate you being here to answer our questions, and
Thank you
I
very much.
reserve the right to call you back as we go through other parts of this legislation to clarify other aspects of the amendment we're trying to draft here. So, Section 5 under H3 seems to be problematic, and we'll have to have a further discussion about what to do with that. But before we do that, let's move on and talk about some of the other changes that this draft makes so that we can decide whether or not certain language stays or certain language goes. Section 6, which is the very next section of H3, lets the Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Services designate other people to serve in his stead on a specific SEC proceeding. That person could be an employee from the Department of Transportation, the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, the Department of Business and Economic Affairs, et cetera, et cetera. That is a change from existing statute. It would be necessitated by the reduction of an SEC of 9 members down to 5 members. Do you see that as being useful, or do we need to ask questions about that? Representative Corman.
Yeah, I have no objection to that. My only concern is that I found the language potentially ambiguous as to whether the designee would be in addition to the DES commissioner or instead of the DES commissioner. And I'd like the wording to make it clear that we're talking about somebody who would be substituting for the DES commissioner.
Okay, that's a good point. I think the intent of the paragraph is to allow the DES commissioner to substitute someone else for himself, but we will get clarification on that. Representative Harrington?
Yeah, just to follow up on that same paragraph, I think that's a good point. I had the same question. It wasn't clear if it was in addition to, but I think the intent is here in place of. This seems to give the unilateral authority to the Commissioner of DES to decide, I'm out, but the Department of Natural Resources and Natural and Cultural Resources is in. Of course, they'd have to agree to do it, but I'm just wondering if we would want to have the commission make that the SEC make that decision, that a recommendation by the Department of Environmental Resources Commissioner saying, in this particular case, I think the Department of Transportation would be better represented, be more helpful than the DES on the commission. So I'm recommending to the commission, to the SEC, that they replace me with them. It just seems to make a little bit more sense that we have, since we are talking about a major change here, because it's not saying that the DES commissioner, if they're going to just say, like, which happens many times on the site evaluation committee, I simply can't make this as commissioner, so I'm going to appoint my senior staff member in lieu of me, but he's still a department member who reports to me. This says I'm going to appoint someone from a totally different department, which I have no authority over, and they're going to come in and now have a vote. And I just think that should be subject to review of the commission as a whole, or this SEC as a whole.
So if we added language to the end of that paragraph that said, subject to approval of the full committee, would that address your issues?
That would do it.
Okay, thank you. Further comment on this section? Okay. Next is the 162H3-A, Administrator and Other Committee Support. Now, this is language that changes the current SEC administrator from a full-time employee of the SEC, even though he's paid for by the Public Utilities Commission, to a full-time employee of the Public Utilities Commission who can float between duties at the PUC and the SEC. And this is one of the, I think, more important changes that we can make to streamline the operation of the SEC. I think we should go forward with this change, unless there is any objection, or
What I heard this morning was that it
please turn on your mic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, what we heard just briefly this morning was that it might be problematic if the schedule of that administrator is loaded up by the PUC, right? If they find a bunch of work for them, then they may not have time to do the SEC work. So we probably do need to legislatively figure out what we can put in here to ensure that when there's an SEC project, that administrator is allowed to devote their time, sufficient time to that project, because otherwise it will not be properly supported.
Any ideas?
Can I-
Any ideas
can I
on
follow up on
language?
that? I think if we if we address the issue that I brought up earlier, and let's just say we go with the chairperson of the PUC being the head of the SEC and the PUC, that will correct that problem, because one person's not going to say, you got to work 35 hours a week on this project for the PUC, but I'm also telling you to work 35 hours a week for this project on the SEC, because making a singular person to have the authority for both will eliminate the problem. It's a legitimate concern the way it's written, but I think that'll eliminate it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Having the PUC commissioner be the chair of the SEC would eliminate that problem. Agreed? Representative Corman?
Thank you. Might it be worth actually including in the statute language saying that the administrator shall prioritize work for the SEC?
Right.
That language seems reasonable at first blush, but if the PUC commissioner is the one who's supervising this employee, then the employee himself can't prioritize
Right.
his work on the SEC. It would have to be the commissioner himself who prioritized this person's work on the SEC.
I think what I'm hearing from Representative Corman is the idea that the administrator who is currently an SEC resource and is now being asked to take on PUC work in the time that he's idle, that there has to be some language in here that basically states that his role is that support role and that that should take priority. Maybe he can't make it a priority, but we should maybe state that his priority job is support of the SEC, and his additional time will be taken up with PUC duties as he is available, right? So something something that states that SEC comes first in terms of why he was hired and what his job is.
Right, and that was my intent. Thank you.
So the position of administrator shall be, well, it says that the position may be filled by an independent contractor,
Correct.
as it's currently worded.
Because it won't
So-
necessarily always be the same person as we were discussing in the other sections. But this definition goes on to the second page, and it basically says the chairperson reports is under the supervision of the chairperson of the Public Utilities Commission, shall perform duties for the Public Utilities Commission and the Site Evaluation Committee as directed by the chairperson of the PUC. So maybe it should be Site Evaluation Committee first, and I think there should be a statement that this person is a resource to the Site Evaluation Committee first. I don't know how we're going to word it, but
Okay, so change the priority to make SEC first priority,
mm-hmm.
and then other PUC duties
And work on other, yeah.
secondary to SEC responsibilities.
Just another comment on that section
Go
as
ahead.
well, going along with the having the two separate people be in charge, because we've also say here now, any person hired by the administrator shall be approved by the chairperson of the Public Utilities Commission. So as written, the chair of the Site Evaluation Committee would not approve the hiring of outside contractors for the Site Evaluation Committee, but the chair of the PUC would. So I think that's another example of why we have to make those one and the same.
Okay, good point. Any other problems with the language in this section? Yes. Representative Corman.
Yes, I think I noted this in email I sent around to the subcommittee. Really minor thing, the stricken material at the end of this section actually is stricken, but from the wrong section. It should be from H3 and not H3A.
Where is that?
So the stricken material that starts in the case of a public member,
Yeah.
the procedure outlined in RSA, et cetera, that here it appears at the end of section H3A, but in current
It's H4.
statute, it's actually at the end of section H3.
Oh, and it says H4B. Isn't it?
Yeah, but the actual text that's stricken, if you look at the current statute,
Yep.
it's not at the end of H3A, it's at the end of H3. I'm just saying that this needs to be moved. It's going to be stricken, but it needs to be moved to the correct place where it's going to be stricken, which is at the end of H3.
I made a note of that, so,
Okay, he's talking about the training aspect here.
yeah. All right. The next section,
Can I ask a question on that?
oh, yes, of course.
Thanks. I was looking at that earlier, and my question is there a point to people having training in terms of what they're doing on the site evaluation committee? That we're saying they don't need any training, they're just gonna make decisions on? I mean, I think the decisions are supposed to be objectively made based on the findings of what's presented to the committee. But is there any benefit to the training that we're eliminating?
The training was added to statute, and I remember this well because I sponsored the amendment that added that section to the statute, was aimed primarily at the public members and was also aimed at dealing with the churn where there was on some occasions as many as 40 different people serving on the site evaluation committee, all with different training and expertise. And so this part of the statute was added when we had that churn situation. The changes that we're seeking to make here would eliminate that churn and therefore potentially eliminate the need for the training.
Thank you.
Okay, next is this amendment would keep HB4, the public members section, whereas it would have been repealed under the previous version.
We did skip the HB4A subcommittee repeal. Should we discuss that
That's
at all?
coming up, that's next,
What's that?
that's next.
Oh, okay. I thought we were skipping on public members.
That's next? What do you mean that's next?
Oh, well, he's talking about the subcommittee's gone away, it's just, I mean, the subcommittee, no, I'm sorry. The subcommittees were repealed because we don't have subcommittees anymore, so that section H4A is no longer
Oh, okay.
in existence.
Right, okay. So that might necessitate a change in numbering?
Yep.
Or we'll let OLS figure that out. They're the experts on that, so. So then the language on public members is basically there to clarify when a public member has to recuse himself or has to be absent, et cetera, that the alternate member would take his place on any proceeding that was active at the time. And there's also some language here about how they get compensated for their service. Representative Corman.
Thank you. So when I looked at the list of areas that we were looking for expertise from the public member, it's a pretty long list, and it looks like at least the first item or two are maybe duplicative of what we already have on the SEC, especially public deliberative or adjudicative proceedings. We already have the PUC commissioners. They have experience in that area. I'd really rather see the environmental protection, natural resource protection, pretty much everything starting from environmental protection. I think those are the areas of expertise that would be not represented on the SEC without a public member. I'm not sure on business management. I'm lukewarm on that. But I feel like we could remove public deliberative or adjudicative proceedings because we already have that, and it's more important to get expertise in the other areas on that list.
I wouldn't object to that. That sounds reasonable.
I would go along with getting rid of the public defender and adjudicative proceeding, but business management is actually part of the evaluation. They have to, one of the part of the evaluation is, can the company build the project? And so I think business management should stay.
Okay, that makes sense too. Any other further discussion of section H4-B? All right, moving to section H:5, prohibitions and restrictions. The significant change here is the last 4 lines, which defines what a substantial change or addition means. And the language chosen for this definition is a greater than 1/3 increase in the capital investment, capacity, footprint, or height of an existing energy facility, or a change in the energy source for an electric generating station, or other reuse of a site as an energy facility. Now, in a separate document that I handed out to everyone, there is a proposal for creating an advanced track or a condensed track, a fast track, that would allow changes to an existing site to be made more expeditiously in 180 days as opposed to 360 days. And the specifics of the process that were envisioned or are envisioned are set out here. And the question then becomes, do we need all of this information in an amendment in statutory language? Or is this something that the SEC might work out in rules, which would indicate that maybe the statute should say the commission will develop rules to handle fast track changes to existing facilities? Representative Harrington.
Yeah, having lived through a very, very lengthy discussion on what a substantial increase is, and this is sort of the same thing, this idea of what constitutes a fast track, I would think the legislature should give guidance on this and not leave it just figure it out yourself, SEC, and go write some rules, because that could come out. Like I say, I have a bill out there now where the legislature passed a section of this bill which directly and only applies to wind facilities. But when the SEC wrote their rules, they applied all those new restrictions to every type of facility, even though it was never in the law. So I don't want to give the rulemaking that much leeway. I think we need to supply some type of guidance.
Okay, given that reality, I think that this outline of a process for doing a fast track, which is fully 2 pages long, may be beyond our capability to produce an amendment for this year, and might require the submission of a new bill in order to make this happen.
Mr. Chairman, do we have a vehicle that we could use for updates in the coming year? Do you know?
I don't. I haven't looked at the LSR list. I don't know if there are any SEC bills on that list or not. However, the Senate could submit a bill to do this fast track. I don't think that maybe this amendment is the place to do this. Representative Harrington, what do you think of the definition of substantial change or addition?
I think it's well worked out with, I have one question on it though, and then this is just an aging factor, I guess, if you want to. Substantial change talks about greater than 1/3 increase in the capital investment. Well, let's say the facility is 30 years old and it was built for $100 million. And now you want to put in some change that's going to cost $80 million. So that would not cover it would be considered a substantial change. But if you were to build the original facility today, it would cost $800 million. So using that logic, it wasn't a substantial change. So somehow we're going to have to make sure that the capital investment as adjusted for inflation or something, because otherwise you're going to get an awful lot of things that, because things have just gotten so expensive over the last 20 or 30 years, that everyone would look at as being, that's not a substantial change, but it's going to be more than 1/3 of the original capital costs. So you can have adjusted for inflation or something.
Good point, Representative Corman.
Thank you. So I actually had a similar thought to Representative Harrington's thought, but yeah, well, we've agreed in the past on rare occasion. But I also was thinking, typically the capital investment isn't always just like once at the beginning. It's over a period of time. I'm just thinking how difficult that would be to actually account for with the discount rate and all that. I had one other comment, which is when we talk about a 1/3 increase in, say, capacity, let's say nameplate capacity, for a large plant, a 1/3 increase is a really big increase. For a small plant, it's not that big a deal, but for a large plant, a 1/3 increase could really be a significant increase with a significant impact. So I'm not really sure how to go about that, but I feel like we might want to have some absolute number, a 1/3 increase or an increase over a certain capacity, a certain amount of generation, and either one would trigger.
Well,
Yeah.
Representative McGee?
my thought might be that the trigger would be if the change at the plant were to increase beyond the nameplate capacity by a quarter or more. Well, it could be 1/3, or it could be 30%, but to Representative Corman's point, in some cases, that's a significant increase.
Well, to use his example, let's say it was a 30 megawatt solar facility. A 1/3 increase would be 10.
Yep.
But let's say we're talking about a 700 megawatt gas plant. A 1/3 increase would be much larger than 10. Right. So,
Can I just comment on this?
Yes,
I would tend to
comment.
agree because if you're talking about increasing by, say, over 100 megawatts, I mean, we already have a provision that says anything over 30 megawatts new has to go to the site evaluation committee. So I would think that's see, we've agreed again. But today we got to write this one down. That's a good point, because if you're talking about putting in, if you had that 700 or 900 megawatt gas plant and you increased it by 250 megawatts, that's a substantial change, I think. And you're talking about, increasing pipeline boiler emissions and stuff like that. So some cap, I don't know what a logical number would be, but it's going to be somewhat arbitrary. 100 megawatts, not to exceed 100 megawatts, or not to exceed 50 megawatts. Or something like that would be something that would be worthwhile putting in, because you are opening up something there for. I mean, let's just say, for example, Seabrook decided, I don't see how they would do this, but this decided they wanted to increase by, they could increase, 400 megawatts, and it would involve new transmission lines and new emissions and maybe some new cooling systems or whatever. But that's a massive amount of change, and this is what this committee is supposed to look at. So I'd have to set some cap. Now, what would be rational on that? That's one of the things I'd like some input from some of the people in the back of the room that may be contemplating doing something like this. But I think something like 100 megawatts would clearly be something you wouldn't want to go over.
Mr. Licata, do you have a comment on this question?
Not specifically on the point that Representative Harrington was making, but just wanted to also add, I think the issue of the capital investment related to the increase is problematic and confusing. As Representative Corman and Harrington pointed out, is that, the point of the original project increased by inflation? Is it, the most recent capital investment? I'm not sure it adds value, and I think it confuses the matter. So just wanted to put a fine point. I don't have an opinion on, I'm just seeing this for the first time on the, increase in generating capacity, but I think the capital investment language is problematic.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Monahan, do you have some comments to make about this question? I noticed that the document called SEC Reform Condensed Tract for Changes to Existing Facilities does have criteria. Repowering of a facility can be no larger than existing nameplate capacity. A project which is expanded or added to an existing facility may not increase the existing nameplate by more than 50%, et cetera, et cetera. It seems to me that for the purposes of creating an amendment here, this may be more complicated than what we can accomplish in the next week and a half, which we have to do in order to get an amendment ready for an exec session on November 6th.
I kind of agree, except that if Representative Harrington and Corman are agreeing on so much today, anything's possible. But yeah, I should say I did, knowing that I wasn't sure how far House Bill 609 was going to go. I did speak with Senator Waters during the Senate filing period about potentially filing a bill, and I think he filed a title to address this concept, which is a different animal than the substantial or sizable addition section of it. So I do think there should be separate tracks for that. And then what I would observe on the sizable addition language that you have before you today, 2 weeks ago we met, I kind of observed that maybe eliminating the capital section of it might make sense for all the reasons that Representative Corman and Harrington observed, trying to guess the way to say, is it a fixed dollar amount that you wouldn't want to put in the bill? And if a plant was built 30 years ago, it's just hard to, I think with the other criteria, the commission's capable of figuring out in the legislature, what sizable is. So the other issue I'm seeing again for the first time today and trying to get my arms around is the restriction on the fuel source that's included in it. I can kind of appreciate that, but I also know what's in the pipeline is probably facilities that, big facilities that want to add storage, or big facilities that want to add solar at a non-sizable change. You wouldn't be able to use that. If Seabrook Station was going to put in a 30 megawatt solar project, that's not sizable. Was it 1,300 megawatts, Mike? Yeah, so this would be a small piece, but because there's a different fuel type, you wouldn't be able to do it under the sizable addition allowance. So
you're talking about the language that says, or a change in the energy source?
yes, yeah.
Okay.
No, I understand there's lots of stuff buried in there, but as we said before, this is not going to be an easy section to write. And then, for example, in order to comply with reliability expectations, if somebody wanted to add a fuel storage tank, a oil tank at their gas facility for winter backup, it's a different fuel source, and so, again, they wouldn't be able to do it as a sizable additional allowance. And it would take them more than a year to get through the site evaluation committee.
I can see that a change in the energy source and fuel source might be different things, but you're right, it is problematical language. I agree.
Yep.
Representative McGee, did you have a comment?
I just wanted to ask Mr. Monahan if he had heard any rumblings among the other people who watch about the idea of putting in language about non-emitting sources, because you seemed like you were alluding to different types of fuel that could be added to different facilities. It seems that most of the plants in the area, when they're looking at augmentation or storage or reliability, they are trying to move toward cleaner sources. But do you think it's appropriate for us to consider any of that in terms of the language here?
Yeah, I did talk, again, this would probably be more in the potential Center Waters bill than on the sizable addition piece, but I did have a good conversation with folks in the environmental community the end of last week to try to get our arms around that. I'm a little hesitant to do it because I don't know what is in our rubric digester admit, does a biomass plant admit, does the production of renewable natural gas, which the legislature endorsed a couple years ago, is that admitted? So generally speaking, I think everything that's coming down the line is cleaner, but I'm not sure that we know with precision what it'll all be that it's best to put that in the statute. But I want to work with people because I'm trying to get everyone to yes on this.
Representative Harrington.
Yeah, I realize this is a really tough nut to crack. The example you gave on the dual fuel is, it's right on because it's something that I'm not sure of the status of the plants in New Hampshire if they're gas only that don't have dual fuel capability, but there certainly could be one. On the other side of it, though, you've really got to watch it on this one because let's just say you had a 100 megawatt wind facility that was existing, and they decided in order to go with their intermittency that they decided to put in some gas turbines. And there's actually GE actually does make a gas turbine, wind turbine combination. So one runs, the other one doesn't. So maybe you decide, let's add the gas. I can't see people saying, well, we're just adding some more gas turbines in out there. They'll only run when the wind's not blowing. Don't worry, it's not a sizable addition. I can see a lot of people getting very excited about adding new gas turbines. So I don't have a solution to it, but I'm just saying eliminating it is not the answer. It's going to be some caveat there, I think. So, and I'm not.
Yeah,
sure.
maybe it has to do with, I was going to say, it won't work to make the current facility operate more efficiently so that you don't have to rely on admitting base load. Intermittent would be a good cleaner investment, but it's hard to write that into 609. Maybe we address that in the waters bill.
Okay with that?
Representative Corbin.
Thank you. Yeah, it seems to me that there are various permutations that could happen here, right? What if they wanted to put wind in, some wind turbines in a solar installation that was somewhere near residential? My feeling is that we can't really cover everything that's possible, that could possibly happen here. So if that's true, then how do we err? Do we err on the side of more caution or err on the side of less caution? And I would err on the side of more caution, and I would leave in the change in energy source, recognizing, there may be a time when it probably isn't a big deal, but I'd rather capture the times when it is a big deal.
One other possibility.
Representative Harrington.
Yeah, one other possibility is I agree that it could be a big deal. I mean, if someone decided to drop an SMR in some place that was only 40 megawatts because it was a 500 megawatt gas plant for whatever reason, I'm sure there'd be people marching in the streets about you putting a nuclear plant out there and we don't even get to talk about it. So, but I also think it's going to be very hard not to crack. And since it sounds like we're working on the changes to existing facilities, which is sort of like a repowering, and changing energy source or other reuse of the site as an energy facilities kind of fits into what we've got over on the repowering portion. Maybe we can just leave that stuff off with the idea we'll pick it up on the other bill, because it seems to be more in that and probably deserves more attention that we can give it in one paragraph in this one.
Yeah, maybe that's the way to get it. Because
But
if
we
you look at some of the things that, weren't, like changes at the switchyard or a new bank of transformers or things like that, those are things that got pulled into the site evaluation committee because the amount of money, because of the capital investment. So I think we're already talking about trying to address that.
Yeah.
So I think it's that type of thing where there has been some unfortunate, lengthy regulatory processes. We still haven't resolved the issue of, backup fuel source and things like that, but maybe you're right. Maybe the other bill is for that.
Yeah, I think if we use that, we could still put in the capacity and footprint and so forth take this part out, put it with the other bill where, because we could put more work into it and more specifics as to, you know, it's more of a reuse or repowering issue rather than I'm looking like what you do, where they have the problem now where someone comes in and says, well, we've got to replace the switch yard on our whatever plant because it's 40 years old and it's now going to cost, we got to replace part of it and it's going to cost $100 million to do it. But we're basically putting the same thing in we took out. So there really isn't any impact on anybody. If anything, it's probably been more efficient now than they were when the old ones were bought. That's the one we want to exempt from the full site evaluation committee. So I think that would, leaving these words out would do that, as long as we pick them up on the other side so we do address them, because that is going to be an issue, repowering down the road. Though I don't think it's something we have to address in the next 2 weeks, whatever we have, Mr. Chairman.
Right. I'd only say I would, it'd be my commitment to work with, I don't want to wait until April and crossover for this subcommittee or this committee to get it. So I will speak with Senator Waters, confirm it was filed, and maybe invite some of you to join as co-sponsors so you're part of the process as it moves through the Senate as well.
That makes sense. So from what I'm hearing, I think it's best if we drop all this language from our amendment for HB 609 and let that be covered with additional legislation going forward.
Are you talking about, I was suggesting that we leave the greater than 1/3 increase in capacity, footprint, or height of an existing energy facility. Take out the rest of the stuff and put it in the other bill, but leave that in. So if there is, like the example that was given, if someone has to go in and replace a bunch of transformers, which price has gone out of sight on, so it would be costly, but it's basically a 1-for-1 replacement. But it's, it's going to be something somewhat different because they're going to be they're manufacturing today rather than 40 years ago. So if we left that in, that would still cover that part. And then on the bigger project, we would encompass the rest of the stuff because that's going to be a lot more work to get that done.
So you would like to see the language that says a substantial change or addition means a greater than 1/3 increase in capacity, footprint, or height of an existing energy facility.
And possibly add, as we discussed, a 1/3 increase in capacity not to exceed 100 megawatts.
Okay, not
So
to
we have
exceed
that
100
cap
megawatts.
in there.
Okay. I would be good with leaving that language in, but we have to take the following paragraph, which tries to define this fast track process. We have to take that out. I mean, there's just no way we can. Yeah, two. Yeah.
Just put that in the Waters future bill.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. All right. All right. So that's a plan.
A question on that, the end of that section, which is 2 and 3. Oh, okay, the question from back there. Why don't you address them first?
Mr. Shulock, please come up.
Just trying to work my way through the language with examples to see how you might want it to work. And so a substantial change means a change in the energy source. Okay, and so if you're changing the energy source, then you would get the fast track under 2 if you leave that there, or whatever benefit you get from just making a substantial change under the current rules, right? But if you make a greater than 1/3 increase in the footprint, right, you get the fast track. Don't you really want that to be, if it's if you're doing something less than 1/3 of the footprint, then you get the fast track or whatever benefit you currently get, right?
I think that's the way it's written, isn't it? A substantial change means an increase of more than 1/3. So if it's less than 1/3, it's not a substantial change. And if it's not a substantial change, under the existing rules of law, you already get the fast track.
But under 2, you get the fast track if it's a substantial change.
Oh, I see what you're saying. If we eliminate 2, then there's no mechanism for any fast track. So we need to leave 2 in.
Well, I'm just not sure you want to get a fast track if somebody quadruples the size. Right?
It would only be if it's less than 1/3.
No, but it says greater than 1/3. See, up in
Yeah.
:5, it says greater than a third.
So that makes it a substantial change, and a substantial change doesn't get the fast track.
No, under 2, substantial change does get the fast track,
Oh, maybe it
180
must be-
days.
Okay. Notwithstanding evaluation.
That's why I was.
Oh, okay.
That's
okay.
why I was suggesting we leave this whole issue Until
I do think
later.
it needs some work.
because I think it
Okay.
needs more work.
That's a
I
mistake.
don't think that for the purposes of the amendment we're trying to create for HB 609, that we can do justice to everything that needs to happen to make this definition and what happens after the definition is made as rigorous as it needs to be. And that's what Senator Waters' bill presumably will allow us to do. So that's why I think we should just drop this change altogether.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. We're getting overly complicated to try to get this thing through. And in reality, to my knowledge, it's only been a real major issue on the scrubber at Merrimack, where we battled for a long time over what a substantial change was or wasn't. But I don't think it's come up all that often that waiting another year will really hurt too much.
I don't disagree, but I get the feeling that Attorney Shulock is trying to help us be consistent with ourselves, because if we're going to pass the first section as part of this bill, we may be inconsistent if we don't have something to modify it as currently is. It may not be the correct thing in section 2, but if we don't pass them at the same time and we don't know if the other bill is going to pass, it may create some problems within the statute in terms of clarity. Is
Yeah,
that
so what I'm
correct?
advocating is that we don't change number 1.
Well, I'm talking about number 2 going with number 1. Something needs to be there, I
Well, if we
think.
don't change number 1, number 2 is a proposal, a new proposal.
Yep.
So that won't go forward either. I'm saying we're not going to touch this existing
Oh, okay.
part of statute at all.
So we're going to leave out the substantial redefinition.
We're going to have to push
Okay.
that off.
Well, then there's no inconsistency.
Yeah.
Thank
So-
you for
so-
recognizing me.
Okay.
Thank you.
So
Mr.
you're
Shulock.
suggesting that we leave section H5 as it is in current statute?
Yes, for now. Yes. All right, so the next section then would be application for a certificate.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I'm just.
Yes, go ahead.
At the top of that page, and I'm trying to figure out where this popped in. It's not in red, but it says, notwithstanding the foregoing, an applicant may request the site evaluation committee to assume jurisdiction, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not seeing that in the existing statute. Is that, am I just looking in the wrong place? Where does this all of a sudden pop in? Because in,
This is this. Section 2, RSA, where it starts with RSA 162 H7 notwithstanding, that's all new language.
right, but on the
Proposed
top of page 4, it continues on from page 3. There's a section there, and in section 3, which is on the bottom of page 3, it says it's lined through, and then it goes over to the top of the next page, and it says, notwithstanding the foregoing, an applicant may request. And I'm just wondering where that came from, because I don't see it in,
That's in current statute.
okay, it's in current statute in what section?
Section H5, item 3.
H5. I don't even have an H5 item 3 in mine.
Well, in the current statute, not.
Yeah, that's what
not-
I'm looking
not-
at. H5, I see I don't know.
The RSA that's online
yeah,
may
the-
not be up to date.
Yeah, the-
Okay, it mustn't be, okay.
Yeah, I'm looking at the RSA that's online right now.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm looking at the one online now, and it doesn't show any H3 in it, so.
H5.
Shows H5, but no section 2 or 3.
No, section 3 says the applications shall be governed by the applicable laws, rules, and regulations of the agencies and shall be subject to the provisions of RSA 162-F or RSA 162-H in effect on the date of filing. Notwithstanding the foregoing, an applicant may request the site evaluation committee to assume jurisdiction.
Okay.
And in the event that the site evaluation committee agrees to assert jurisdiction, the facility shall be subject to the provisions of this chapter.
162 H5. Okay, because
It's
I
there.
looked it up online, and it's not there, so I
What
don't know.
what I've observed is that sometimes you don't see the correct information in an RSA online, and that's because your computer, if you've visited that RSA before,
Yeah.
your computer caches
Right.
the information that was there, and it doesn't reload properly
Oh.
to update the online. So I would flush my cache if I were you, and
Oh,
then
you can show me how to flush my cash then later, okay?
okay, later we'll talk about that.
The only cash I know how to flush is when I'm getting rid of money for something.
Have you experienced that, Representative Corman?
Well, I've certainly experienced web pages being out of date, not specifically our RSAs, however.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's move now to the changes to the next section, which is H7, application for a certificate.
Ooh.
So this section just makes some changes to the fact that the chairperson will now be the person who determines whether a application is administratively complete. And if it's not administratively complete, what to do next.
Just a little confused, a question. The committee chairperson or designated presiding officer, is there a provision for something like that somewhere else? This is the first time I think I've seen that term, designated presiding officer.
There
Well,
is a
remember
reference.
when we discussed section 5 under H3? The senior serving attorney member of the PUC shall
Yeah.
serve as chairperson, and
Or
well,
designate,
some of
should be.
the duties underneath that,
Oh, they
A,
can
B, C, and
delegate it
D,
to somebody.
allow him to
Okay.
delegate that responsibility. If we take that out,
Okay,
which we
presiding
decided,
officer, okay.
we're going to do, then some of these changes no longer probably
No, you
Makes
still have the
sense.
designated presiding officer, that's where it came from. Okay.
that's where that came from, anyway. So what I'll have Mr. Getz do is go through this language again in light of the deletion of section 5 in H3 to see if any of this language needs to stay or if it can disappear. And if it disappears, then we won't have any real changes to make to this section. Go ahead, Representative Corman.
Thank you. So I noted this is the first of three places where the existing RSA was changed by HB 281, which is currently in chaptered law. The language here in the amendment has the RSA before the changes from 281. So it needs to actually be updated to be in concordance with the changes made to this particular paragraph. And I'm looking at H7 paragraph 4. That changed from HB 281.
So is it already
Correct.
changed on our version?
No, so the version we have here is before the changes from HB 281 were incorporated. So this particular paragraph 4, just needs to be brought into concordance with HB 281's changes.
But this is correct.
What's
It's already updated in the actual online version?
the online version? I don't think the online version is correct. Let me
Okay.
just take a quick look here.
It probably hasn't been updated based on HB
It
281
says
yet.
effective October 7th, 2023. So it looks like it might be.
Let's
Oh,
see.
well, that would be, that
That's
would be
pretty
the effective
recent.
date. That would be the effective date of 281, yeah.
That's 10 days ago, so.
All right, so maybe that is up to date.
it looks
All right, so
like-
I will ask
It's
Mr. Getz to
updated.
update this language
It's got a date here.
and to take into account the
no.
language that's in 281.
Yeah, and what's online in the current RSA has not been updated.
Oh, well, it says it
Yeah, but
has.
I'm
No?
looking at the language,
Okay.
and it hasn't been updated,
Okay.
the actual language.
I have a question.
Yes, Representative
You
Harrington.
said we're going to eliminate 162H35. I thought we were talking about just making that to be the chair of the PUC and then leaving all the duties that are there.
Yes,
including-
correct.
Including assigning someone as a presiding officer. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I meant by eliminate. I meant eliminate the previous directive that the senior serving attorney of the PUC be the chairperson. So that'll be, actually, it's a rewrite. It's not an elimination. All right,
Shall be
so
contemporaneous
it
with
definitely appears we're going to have to have another meeting. We can't move forward based on what we have here. So we're going to have another meeting with a new, fresh amendment draft before we can move forward. How does next Tuesday, the 24th, look to everyone?
Just fabulous.
First of all, it's my birthday. I don't want to be here.
It's your birthday?
Yeah.
Then we'll have
So I guess we'll have to have cake then, right?
Yeah,
yeah, me too.
as long as it's in the morning. I have a dam issue in Durham meeting in the afternoon. So.
Okay. 10 o'clock, 10:24. Work for everybody?
Yep.
Okay. I will have a new draft made. I will send it to everybody before 10:24. And hopefully on 10:24, we will be able to come to a final decision on an amendment so that I can submit it for drafting so that it'll be ready for executive session on November 6th. That is now the date of an executive session based on how this subcommittee is working with, along with the other subcommittees.
That's
So
on the 6th, the other one? right?
November 6th. There will be a public hearing at 9:30 on a non-germane amendment to House Bill 458. And then at 10 o'clock, we will have executive session on all 12 of our 9:30. The non-germane amendment to HB 458 simply reestablishes and continues an assessment committee that's currently in operation, but whose operation ceases as of, I don't know, November 30th or something.
Assessment of what?
Pardon?
Assessment of what?
Utility generation property.
Oh, the property tax?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Pat Abrami's commission. All right, any further business to bring before this subcommittee? Representative Corman?
Yeah, so I did identify other just bookkeeping or housekeeping issues here. As I mentioned, the paragraph I just discussed was the first of three places where it looked like the changes from HB 281 had not been incorporated into this particular amendment. And I can refer you to the other two. So H7 paragraph 6.
H7-6, the committee shall decide.
Yeah, well, with the chairperson or designated presiding officer shall decide. There were changes from HB 281 that were not incorporated into this particular language in our amendment. And then the other place was same section, paragraphs 7, 8, and 9.
Okay,
Goes up to
got it.
section 8.
Update to 281.
Well,
Update.
yeah, I mean, we should at least check that.
Okay,
And as I read it, section H21.
and H22 were part of 281 and so don't need to be part of this amendment.
Right,
Yeah. Got that.
thank you.
Okay. Anything additional? Well, thank you, everybody, for being here today. Appreciate your input. I think we can still get to an amendment. We'll know for sure on the 24th, because if we don't get it done on that day, it doesn't get done, because There's no way we're going to get it done by November 6th if we don't have something in hand on the 24th. So we'll see you on the 24th, and let me know if you have anything you'd like to discuss about this or any other issue. That's it for now. Signing off. So long. Thank you.